Oh, okay, good.
And it's in honor of my late husband, Kirk Englehardt. And we strive to find someone who has really faced some ethical challenges in business and has really shown true ethics, true integrity in their choices. And I think that maybe Joel will be telling you just a little bit more about that. But I'd like to welcome you here. And now President William Cedarberg, will introduce Joel. And at the end of the program, we'll be giving Joel the Excellence in Business Ethics Award. So I'll turn the time over to President William Cedarberg. And once again, welcome and thanks for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Warm up the audience as we enjoy what has happened in Utah. The snow, this is more like Michigan. I felt more like I was in Michigan than in Utah this morning with the snow. I want to welcome everybody. As Elaine mentioned before, this is the Kirk Englehardt Lecture. Kirk was the husband of Elaine. Of course, we know Elaine as our distinguished faculty member in ethics. But Kirk Englehardt was a phenomenally successful individual, but more importantly, was a person of integrity, wisdom, a great intellect, and a commitment to honesty. And so it was befitting with his passing in 2003 that this lecture be created in his name and underwritten by a grant from the Englehardt family. And so, Elaine, we're appreciative of that. And I think you'll find the presentation today to be fitting of that great legacy. We are joined today by Mr. Joel Peterson. Joel is a graduate of Brigham Young University, but we will not hold that against him today. There are a lot of great people that come out of Brigham Young University. He is the founding partner of Peterson Partners, a private equity capital firm founded in 1995. From 73 to 91, he was served in several positions with Travel Pro Company, which is a national commercial real estate investment house. He served as chief executive officer and also the chief financial officer of that corporation. He currently serves on the boards of JetBlue and of Ageron. He is the director of the Franklin Covey Company. He has his MBA from Harvard after getting his undergraduate degree at BYU. He teaches entrepreneurial management at Stanford in their graduate school of business. In addition to that, he has recently been named a director for the Center on the Development of Leadership at Stanford University. I did pull out this one quote that Joel had written about education, and I'll just read this as form of an introduction. The working world experience I use in the classroom is not compartmentalized in my mind. I've had the benefit of starting businesses, running functional areas, having P&L responsibilities, serving on boards, handling litigation, shutting down operations, doing turnarounds, making early, middle, and late-stage investments, handling thorny personnel issues. I got a few right now, Joel. I'll pass on to you afterwards so you have experience with it. I'm impressed with issues of execution and think I've learned things that can be taught about how people build successful businesses. And these principles are as valid in real estate development as they are in any private equity house or in managing large manufacturing concerns. And I think one thing that distinguished Joel Peterson is applying principles of ethics and principles of leadership to being successful in the business world. So at this point, I'll turn the program over to Joel Peterson, our guest speaker, speaking on business ethics and oxymoron. Joel?
Thank you. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here. And let me begin by congratulating this school on becoming a university next summer. So I was delighted to read that news, and I'm sure you're delighted about that too. I'm honored to follow Kim Clark in this lecture series. Kim and I were in graduate school together, and then he went on to become dean of Harvard Business School and is now president of BYU Idaho. I serve on a board with Kim, the JetBlue Airways board, and so I've followed him around a little bit, and I keep hoping that some of the reputation he's developed will rub off on me if I follow around his footsteps a little bit. I want to applaud Utah Valley on its very practical leadership. from the Center of the Study of Ethics, formed to explore the ethical dimensions of various disciplines and contemporary moral issues. That's a very important statement and a very important thing to happen. I'm not surprised that there would be a lecture today on ethics because business scandals have received so much publicity in the last few years. Business schools are now teaching courses in ethics. Indeed, the 43,000 MBA students across the country, almost all will receive some training in ethics, many of them in core courses. At Harvard Business School in the last 3 years, they've turned one of their core courses is now an ethics course. I'm not surprised either in terms of the publicity that we read and the news that we read that people question the ethics of business leaders, as well as those of politicians and used car salesmen and Hollywood stars. Heck, today people even wonder about teachers and priests. I am surprised, on the other hand, to be here in front of you. I don't teach ethics per se. I don't even spend a whole lot of my time agonizing over ethical issues, and I certainly do not hold myself out as any kind of example of unusual virtue. In the interest of full disclosure, I've done mostly the mundane work of starting and running businesses and investing in businesses, meeting payrolls, worrying about customers, hiring, coaching, and firing employees, servicing debt, struggling with product and service quality, teaching classes in entrepreneurship, leadership, and real estate, raising kids, and cheerleading grandkids. This is what I've entitled my remarks today, and I really want to do three things. First is kind of give an overall overview of the issue of business ethics and discuss some of the roots of the lapses in business ethics that we run into so regularly. Secondly, I want to get specific, give you some specific examples, 3 or 4 vignettes from my life, and ask you to imagine yourself in those situations and decide what you would do. Because ethical dilemmas are much more difficult than just deciding not to lie, cheat, or steal. And then finally, I'd like to close by being a little bit prescriptive and giving you a couple of takeaways, things that you might think about as you go forward that would increase the likelihood of ethical behavior in the various organizations that you're associated with. So the title of my talk, as you saw, was Business Ethics and Oxymoron. What's an oxymoron? We all probably know that this is an incongruous or self-contradictory term. And you'll see from this cartoon why business ethics and oxymoron gets listed there. We're not, get serious, John, we're talking business ethics, not ethics. As far back as Shakespeare, we have the notion that some terms don't go together. So this is a quote from Romeo and Juliet. I think it's Romeo's first speech, and he talks about brawling love, loving hate, heavy lightness, serious vanity, feathers of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, and still waking sleep. Today we've all run into a bunch of more modern oxymorons that are quite common. The one that we always think of when we hear the term oxymoron is jumbo shrimp. But here are some other ones that I'm sure you run into on a regular basis. Some have suggested some more whimsical oxymorons. I hope they're whimsical. In fact, before I show you these, I hasten to say that I can only do so because I've been married for 35 years. I've lived in Texas. I've worked on political campaigns. I serve on the board of the airline, and so I'm willing to show you these, recognizing that there's some humor buried in these. So the first is Texas chic, airline food, honest politician, married life. Sorry about that one, Diana. Adult male. And business ethics is the last one. And that's the one we're going to focus on here today. The idea that business and ethics somehow don't go together is really what I want to get you to think about. Why is this so? Why don't businesses just simply ask as they face the issues, the decisions that they have to make, is this right or is this wrong? and then just do what's right, act ethically. I have a quote here from Mark Twain, "Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest." With that, I feel like I should just sit down, and that kind of covers the topic. Instead, what business people often do is they ask the following kinds of questions rather than that one. Will this action maximize profits? Will anyone ever catch this minor or not so minor indiscretion? And if they do, what's the remedy? What is our competition doing relative to this issue? Can we even win if we don't bend the rules or push the envelope? Can we justify what we want to do under the documents? How about under the law? And whoever says what's right and wrong anyway, legal versus illegal is quite enough for me. Thank you very much. So why is this? Well, I think there are at least 5 reasons, and I'm not going to say that they're good reasons, but I think there are at least 5 reasons why people fall into ethical traps or ethical lapses. So I want to go through each of these 5 before I give you these vignettes. The first one is, except for certain universals, not lying, cheating, and stealing, people seem to agree today less and less on what is right and what is wrong. There's kind of an increasing ambiguity about this term in society. So while we've enjoyed social progress that's come with celebrating diversity or not judging others, political correctness or whatever, we've also become a bit cautious about imposing judgment on others. So if you read the kind of the virtue literature, the moral literature, the ethical literature of 100 years ago, you wouldn't it would feel so anachronistic you just wouldn't recognize it in today's world. In fact, I brought a little book by Peter Kine called The Go-Getter. I don't know if any of you have ever read this. It was published in 1921, and I'd recommend it to all of you. I mean, part of it will just be you can't imagine this is what people felt and thought, but it's about loyalty, it's about hustling, it's about all kinds of virtues that we don't recognize as moral virtues in today's world. A corollary to this is in the business world, there's no oath that businessmen take. There's no sort of standard. Whereas doctors will take the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm, and then, help care for and assist the sick and injured. Even lawyers with I have to apologize to my partner, Jordan Clements, who's been my attorney for many years and is now the managing partner of my firm. But he's a great attorney. But the pledge that they take, and he actually lives by, is I will never reject from any consideration personal to myself the cause of the defenseless or oppressed or delay unjustly the cause of any person. Now, the fact that all lawyers don't necessarily live up to that doesn't mean that they haven't said that oath publicly and thought about it. Businessmen and businesswomen, however, are left with internal rates of return, quarterly earnings, shareholder value creation, compounded annual growth rates as the metrics of their success. So there isn't this kind of formalization in business. The third reason, I think, is that the job of business, its essence, its core activity is to create value, to be profitable, to deliver a product at a cost that is less than what you can charge a customer that wants the product. So the core competency that business people have is around resource allocation, reading markets, managing high-performance teams, doing financial engineering, etc. We have no domain expertise in ethics, per se. So the most cynical in the business ranks will see the following. Accounting is a way to manage earnings, tricking investors into thinking one thing when reality is another. This is the Enron problem. This is in essence what happened. And I would encourage any of you to read the smartest guys in the room and the smartest people in the room or something like that, or a Conspiracy of Fools if you want to understand this. But that was in essence the Enron problem. They see marketing as fooling customers into buying products they either don't need or won't do what they promise. Operations, getting the most out of workers through providing minimally legal safety and work conditions. HR, getting people to do the most work for the least pay. strategy is gaining an unfair advantage, building a high wall around it, protecting flanks through litigation, threats, disinformation, and then finally negotiation, using techniques such as anchoring, bluffing, positioning, hard bargaining, lying, withholding information to win. Pretty inspiring stuff, huh? I mean, if that's really the roadmap that you use to win in business, there's no wonder that that the most cynical would conclude that if business isn't unethical, it's at least aethical, to coin a term. In other words, business leaders who see the world through these lenses just simply aren't focused on right versus wrong. Now, I hasten to say, in contrast to these kinds of cynical views of business, that going back to my comment about their teaching ethics courses in business schools, that businesses are now considering the triple bottom line. You hear that talked about in all kinds of business classes, which is being socially responsible, environmentally friendly, and financially profitable. Businesses, public companies are having to file ethics statements. Sarbanes-Oxley is requiring that of public companies, that they actually put on file ethics statements. And then most importantly, there are a lot of really good and decent people who are trying to do the ethical thing in business. The fourth reason for lapses is that businesses reflect society's norms. Businesses respond to opportunities. Businesses don't lead. So businesses tend to consider ethical whatever society considers ethical. So as society embraces or rejects various things, businesses do too. So when I was growing up, and I'm sure some of the other folks, we used to see advertising for cigarettes or alcohol or whatever everywhere. It was ubiquitous. And young people were enticed to it. Well, since there have been discoveries about the harmful effects on young people of those, you don't see that advertising anymore. Businesses don't do that anymore. On the other hand, what do we see? We basically see a lot of soft pornography. We see gambling. We see products that people either can't afford or won't use that are promoted. So as a society, we've kind of cut loose from our forebears' concerns with moral philosophy or their concepts of the nature of virtue, or as the ancient Greeks talked about, living well. Instead, we focus on diversity training, sustainability, and things like that. Worthy, but they're different values. So businesses reflect these values in society. So what are our real values in society? Well, if you want to think about what your real values are, just consider where you spend your time, your money, and your mind share. No matter what you say your values are, where you spend those three things is where they really are. So if we go into society today, we really celebrate celebrities. If you look at the kind of the celebrity antics, such as Britney Spears' faux wedding, or anything Paris Hilton does, or you go on, and you can see that celebrity grabs a lot of our attention, a lot of our mind share, a lot of our money. Or go to the athletes' use of drugs. If I mention the following names: Barry Bonds, Jason Giambi, Floyd Landis, Mark McGuire, and Ricky Williams, what do you think about? You think, well, these are athletes, but you also, right on the heels of that, think of drug abuse or steroids or whatever. Reality TV, has had a huge boom. Well, the way that you win in most of these reality TV contests are by lying and cheating. Those are the keys to winning. You go to the political process, where opposition research has really taken on a huge importance in campaigns. So these deep background checks, innuendo, cloak and dagger, world of op research is how you win in politics. We got documentaries promoting questionable truths and junk science, phony news stories such as Jason Blair, the New York Times, or Dan Rather at CBS. So all of these are a set of values that we see in society that business will reflect. And these are opposed to more traditional values that you read about in these kinds of books that were a century ago. Honesty, character, integrity, loyalty, self-reliance, on and on. How can these sorts of severe virtues compete with the ones in today's society? Should we expect business leaders to resist the societal norms, or just expect the same of them as others? Well, I'll give an answer that I believe to that at the end of this. And then finally, the last thing is that the cost-benefit can favor the unethical. And that's sad to say, but again, it was Shakespeare who caught the essence of this, saying, some rise by sin, others by virtue fall. So it doesn't always work out that being the most ethical is the most rewarding, at least in the short run. When I was going through one of my real challenges in life, I had somebody pull me aside and say to me, no good deed goes unpunished. And I've thought of that several times. And I was preparing this talk, I ran into this article that some of you may have seen. The chairman of Hyundai Motor, Chung Mong-koo, 68, was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in a South Korean prison for embezzling $67 million and spending it on himself and on bribes for politicians and lobbyists. Now, maybe some of you were doing the calculation as I read this. 3 years for $67 million, that's $2 million a month. That's pretty good pay for a temporary lack of ethics, for losing track of my fiduciary duty, just for a season. If on the other hand, you found yourself easily able to resist thinking that you would have been tempted by this sort of an opportunity that Mr. Mong-koo took, let me ask you this. How about if you were offered $3 million a month rather than $2? Or how about 5? Or maybe 10? Now, what if I could guarantee you that you would never, ever, ever be caught by anyone? Now, how about if I throw in fame and the genuine adulation of your peers? Now, what if the board were to inform you that you had to make Hyundai profitable, that there was no choice in the next quarter, and that the market would only allow you to do that if you were to bribe certain officials and get approvals that you should have had before? And what if you were told that to be a CEO in your industry, you had to have a certain standard of living that would be represented by the kinds of funds that he took or received? And until one by one your objections are overcome and you're able to justify whatever actions you take. By the way, every single one of us justifies every action we take all the time. That's natural to human beings. So following this logic, I'm reminded of George Washington's statement where he says, few men have the virtue to withstand the highest bidder. And so I think that's kind of part of the human condition. And business people can easily, if they're not careful, fall into that. So these are the factors, just to recapitulate. The reasons that business ethics is in quotes and occupies this place of being a kind of an oxymoron. Now, if you feel like you're immune to the lying, cheating, stealing part of ethics, I want you to listen to these next 3 vignettes and see what you would have done in these cases, because these are a lot tougher than just not doing what is clearly wrong and accepted as wrong. So I'm going to give you 3 vignettes. The first is a case of sacrificing one for the interests of many, a case of protecting one against the interests of many, and the case of sacrificing many for an institution. Okay, so the first one. So I'm on the board at JetBlue Airways, and we shared information about passengers at the request of Homeland Security after 9/11. Well, as it turns out, this was something that was not unlawful, but it offended our passengers, and it offended a lot of us who said we would never share this information with us. So we appeared on the front page of the New York Times every day for a week or 10 days. And finally called the New York Times up, and there were lawsuits being threatened, et cetera, et cetera. Called the New York Times up and said, what do we have to do to get off the cover of the Times? And they said, just fire whoever made the decision, and it will move to page 25. The interest in the lawsuits will go down, and it'll be basically behind you. So our CEO, David Neeleman, thought about it, and he came away saying, that the person that made that decision made exactly the decision I would have made to share this information after 9/11. How can I sacrifice that one person just to save us from lawsuits, bad publicity, et cetera? Well, that's shareholder money on the one hand versus one career on the other. So there are arguments on both sides of that. Well, clearly we didn't throw the one party overboard, and we have some lawsuits that we're still fighting today over that. There's a corollary to that in another business that I'm involved in where the SEC made accusations against our chief financial officer that were unfounded, that were just untrue. And they finally came back and said, I'll tell you what, if you will just say that there was sloppy bookkeeping publicly, then we'll stop our process against you. And so we would save shareholder money, deposition time on the parts of various board members, et cetera. And all we had to do was publicly spank the CFO. So what's the right thing to do there? Well, again, we decided that the right thing to do is to stand up for this good man and take our medicine otherwise. So that's the first one. Well, the second one then is maybe a little more difficult. A young woman had stolen money. She'd had family pressures. She'd never done anything like this to our knowledge. She said she was sorry, and she said she would pay us back again. On the other hand, that was money that belonged to the shareholders, didn't belong to the board, didn't belong to management. There had been a spate of defalcations in this company involving a lot of other employees, all of whom had said they were sorry and that they would pay things back, and each of whom we'd made quiet deals with. There was also significant liability that would accrue to the board if we didn't pursue this legally. So what is the right thing to do? Turn her case over to the authorities with possible felony charges and jail time, or work out a private settlement and risk that the behavior will persist in the organization? Well, we made the decision to prosecute in that case. Again, that was slightly different because this was somebody who had done wrong. The others were cases where people had done right, had done the right thing. But these are tough calls. Let me give you a third one that's very personal, and this is the one that Elaine alluded to at the beginning. I was offered an enormous opportunity to force or maybe entice others out of their interests in real estate projects that have been built up, a portfolio of properties, at the very bottom of the market. So these were like bargain purchases that I could get. And this so-called roll-up of imperiled interests had the possibility of making me vastly wealthy as soon as the markets recovered, at the expense of my younger partners. The other most senior partners in the organization were willing, they were eager to do this. As I analyzed things, though, I concluded that not only did the interests I be receiving at cents on the dollar have significant value, later proven to be just that, but that those interests that were then underwater had significant option value. So they were valuable. So would I be willing to take others' interests at a moment of their extreme vulnerability when they were powerless to stop me? One of my partners, when I expressed my concerns over this, and this is a long-term partner of mine, said to me, "Hey, Joel, it's only business. This is an opportunity. It's only business." So on the one hand, it was really attractive economically. It was easy because others were running interference for me. But on the other hand, it was really hard not to do because I knew if I didn't do it, I would be getting into a fight. So there was big upside on the one hand and big downside on the other. For me, the dilemma was more than one of economics, however, because I thought it was a bad idea to destroy a culture that we'd spent 20 years in building. For another, I believe that the legal and tax analysis argued against doing it. I even went and got a legal opinion from the foremost partnership tax attorney in the U.S. who confirmed the analysis. And then finally, it just seemed too clever by half. It required a kind of financial legerdemain that cut asset values, triggered losses artificially, called in non-recourse loans at the bottom of the market, and then assigned artificial losses to other partners in kind of a Pac-Man scheme that would vacuum up all these assets to the hands of the most well-positioned and the wealthiest. So I had three alternatives in this case. The first one was using a market downturn to gain control of a vast number of assets that would recover in the next economic cycle. Pretty attractive economically. The second was just sit on the sidelines and allow my partners to do that, to do something that I considered unethical and perhaps illegal. Or the third was to blow the whistle on the whole scheme and risk the future of the company. what would you do? So you have the possibility for enormous wealth. You have other people running interference. You really, have a unique financial opportunity versus this troubling tax and legal analysis and your own sense of what is ethically right or wrong. I determined I just couldn't pass the mirror test if I went along with it. And I worried that, however, if I went public with my analysis, that the entire enterprise would fold in on itself. So I told my partners that I couldn't go along with it, but that I wouldn't blow the whistle on them. And I don't know, I'd be interested to talk with the ethicists and the philosophers and the people who think about these things to find out what they would do in this circumstance, but I picked kind of a middle ground. Well, unfortunately, they filed suit against me, which effectively silenced me for 4 years, put me through 14 days of videotape deposition. If any of you have been in depositions, you know that's like going to the proctologist over and over and over again. I spent 6 weeks at trial. It effectively quieted me during the pendency of this roll-up. It nearly bankrupted me. It cost me 4 years of my life in my most productive professional years and my best years with my small family. I think it put my health at some peril. I stopped sleeping, and I still haven't fully gotten back to sleeping, a full night's sleep, and my future in doubt. And all of this to be unsuccessful in stopping the roll-up. So I was unable to get them from taking advantage of the other partners. I was unable to help anybody from falling into this trap, unable to win a public victory, unable to maintain my relationships with people with whom I'd remained close. But they did settle after this trial of 6 weeks on exactly the principles that we'd discussed. So I feel good about having passed the mirror test, but that was a tough dilemma for me. Okay, the final thing then, so I didn't give you all these slides to tell you which vignette was coming up. Takeaways. So these are going to feel really simple and things that you learned at your mother's knee. But I think the two things that you can do in your life and that I've found that really are kind of the signposts are to respect other people and then figure out where the bright lines are and operate well within side of them. And if you said it in a word, it would say be a fiduciary. Consider others' interests as important as your own. Look out for others the way that you'd look out for your own. So here's 3 or 4, half a dozen things to think about. And I think if you'll think about these things, they will make your own lives, whether it's in family or organization or here at school or whatever, to be more ethical. And I don't know exactly why this works this way, but I heard a talk by Richard Lamb, who's the Democratic governor of Colorado, say that, in our society we're now celebrating diversity. He said, I respect diversity, but I celebrate unity. So wherever you can bring people together under values, if people are unlikely to be unethical in a unified way, it's very tough to get people to rally around really bad behavior. So this idea of getting people unified around values is one. Treat others the way you'd like to be treated. Well, that's pretty self-evident. But at the root of a lot of these business violations, accept blame and reflect credit. So many of us are eager to grab the credit whenever anything good comes and then to lay off the blame on others. Well, that kind of attitude tends to engender behavior that is unethical over time. Third one is be punctual. If you're not punctual, you're stealing another's time and life. And so people who aren't punctual often will violate bigger kinds of things. So being punctual is a way to respect others. And if you want to have an ethical organization, get to know everybody in the organization. Know them by name, by situation, by family, and by concern. It's tough to act in unethical ways if you really know and care about and indeed love the people in the organization. It's just tougher to act in ways that are shabby. Then make sure if you're in the hiring business that you hire A players. There's this old phrase that A's hire A's and B's hire C's. And I found that to be true over and over and over again. Hire A-grade people, highly moral, highly competent people. It was Don Shula that said, God answers the prayers of the team with the biggest and fastest linemen. So I think being very practical about it, just get the big, fast, highly moral lineman working for you. Then help others achieve their dreams. Develop your dreams and you create passion. Develop the dreams of others and you create happiness. Happiness. J. Fulton Sheen. So I think, in summary, this, and plus a bunch of other things that you could think about the ways that you deeply respect others, that you really consider yourself a fiduciary for others' interests. That is going to engender ethical behavior within organizations. The second takeaway is operate inside the lines, and kind of stealing from Stephen Covey here. These are 7 indicia of highly suspect ethics. So these are things that I think you want to worry about if you see. So these to me would be kind of bright lines within which I would try to operate. The first is, when you see people with expensive art collections, expensive corporate art collections, I'll tell you why these trouble me in the end, one by one. With airplanes, fleets of aircraft. Enron had 7 airplanes. It cost them $100 million a year, $5,000 an hour, for executives to fly around, a lot of the time doing their own bidding, doing their own business. Relatives, spouses, children, paramours, whatever. Having those on the payroll you're bumping up against a bright line. Retreats. Some of these corporate retreats that you see, big boondoggles, expensive vacations, etc. Political contributions. You see a lot of that going on in companies where people are forced to contribute to campaigns. And then finally, huge salaries and bonuses. This isn't finally. That's only 6. So this would be, I don't know if you've seen I've been watching the airline industry in the last little bit, and a lot of these bankrupt airlines out there, you have CEOs making $10 million a year running a bankrupt airline. Well, that's one of the ones where I think they're bumping over a bright line. And then rich severance packages. You may have read recently about Bob Nardelli, the CEO at Home Depot, which is basically a failed CEO. He walked off with a severance package of $210 million. Now, none of these is illegal. Not one of these is illegal. I think they all bump against a line of judgment where you say, is this really ethical? And why is this not ethical? Well, this is from monies that could be paid to workers in the organization, payable as margins on products or services that could be used for R&D, or simply to otherwise increase the value of the stock in employees' 401k retirement. So it's hard to see these as fiduciary behavior. If you really go back to this idea that being ethical in the business world is being a fiduciary for others, treating others' interests as valuable as your own, then I think you can answer a bunch of these dilemmas. So here we have these high-profile ethical dilemmas, Enron, Tyco, Global Crossing, et cetera, the entire S&L industry. And we have spectacular fault. I mean, if you look at what happened to Hewlett-Packard, which is one of the leaders, who had a severe ethical issue just this last fall, or Fannie Mae, who was chosen as the most ethical company, it was chosen the most ethical company by Business Ethics magazine in 2004. In 2005, it was listed as one of the 5 most unethical companies. And a lot of it is because they don't set the bright lines and operate within the bright lines. So early in my career, somebody told me that gaining an advantage in business is like playing on the interior of the offensive line of a football team. Here's what they said. There's holding on every play. The key is not to get caught. All that matters in the end is whether or not you win the game. So be careful the ref doesn't see you. Now, if that's the attitude that people take in business game, business will remain an oxymoron. Business ethics will remain an oxymoron. Instead, if business leaders set their compasses before the storm, operate within the lines, and respect others deeply with the same honor that they hold their own interests, then business ethics will no longer be one of those oxymorons that gets a laugh. And I thank you for, just recap and thank you. Appreciate your time. stage. Okay.
We'd like to present Joel with this award, the president and I would, and then we'll open it up to question and answer. So, President, do you want to read that citation for us then?
I will do so. Before I do so, I think you have a flavor as to why, Joel, you're such a fitting recipient of the Kirk Englehardt Award. And those of you that didn't know Kirk, he would have felt very comfortable with the presentation. The Excellence in Business Ethics Award goes to Joel Peterson. The Excellence in Business Award is initially presented by the UVSC President Board and the Center for the Study of Ethics to an individual who displays exemplary ethics in their life, both professionally and personally. Exemplary ethics demonstrates a sustained commitment to understanding the necessity of integrity and humanity in business pursuits. The individual demonstrates strengthening business ethics through fiscal responsibility, leadership, civic activity, and personal example. Joel Peterson, we believe that you exemplify the traits of excellence in business ethics. On behalf of the Utah Valley State College, the students, the faculty, the administration, the boards, the surrounding community, and I will add the Englehardt family, we present you this award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We also like to give a cash award with it as well. And if I could just quickly thank folks for coming. We've got Joel's wife over here. We've got Kirk's mom, Gloria Englehardt, his sister Sharon, too. My daughter, Kelly Englehardt. Kirk's longtime business partner, Jay Miller. If you can say that you've been in business with someone for 25 years, you know both of you are very honest. My sister Gwen Church and my brother Lonnie Eliason. And I thank Dean Stan Jenny of the School of Business for helping sponsor this. It's nice to have Vice President Carl Worthington here, as well as Dean Cobb, and so many faculty from the School of Business, from the School of POS, from Trades and Technology. Acting Dean Carey is here, I'm sure, Ernie Carey. So thanks to all of you, and I think we've got 5 minutes for questions.
Before I do that, I presented them a cheap award, not the more expensive award. So, you probably were wondering what this was up here. You actually get this as well. So, Joel, congratulations. This is a wonderful globe, kind of symbolically reminding us all the global impact of all of our decisions.
And it has Antarctica on the top.
Right on the top.
So,
all right. Yeah. So let's give Joel Peterson a nice.
Thank you. Sure.
Thank you. Also, there's a buffet in back, and we're going to have a reception for a half hour, so you can visit with Joel, ask him questions. Please come meet him and eat food.
Okay. Sure.
Joel, thank you for coming and speaking to us. You touched on several points of interest to me, and I wanted to give you a response to this question. In business culture, it seems that we either have to rely on legal regulation of business activity or self-regulation, whether it be at the personal level of one's personal virtue or the organizational level. And you had mentioned being a fiduciary, but of course that concept comes from personal self-regulation rather than a professional organizational regulation like you see in the American Bar Association, the American Medical Association. So what are your thoughts about the possibility of professional ethical codes of conduct for business leaders and owners such that it creates a kind of culture of shame whereby if someone is found to have violated professional standards of business ethics, that they are unhireable, as opposed to some of the CEO compensation packages you mentioned and other things whereby people are able to technically get away with tremendously unethical behavior, but still make off, and do well in the business community. So, can you speak to that?
Yeah, of course, there are laws that define what it is to be a fiduciary. The problem with the laws are they are kind of the lowest common denominator. I mean, the law does not make something ethical. It just means you can abide by a certain set of rules, and as quickly as laws are passed or regulations passed, people figure out ways around them or to do the minimum. One of the issues that I see with Sarbanes-Oxley is it has turned a lot of things that should be codes of honor, of ethics, of oath, into law. So now you publish this profession of ethics and they become a little bit meaningless. And so I think we really have a kind of a problem. What was well-intentioned, I think, is having a lot of untoward effects. So, for example, what Sarbanes-Oxley is about having better corporate governance. I mean, that's the whole idea. Well, what has happened is corporations spend so much time now with the legal compliance and housekeeping that they're not looking at strategy anymore. There's so much more liability that is assigned to board members that many of the best board members leave. Many good board members say, I will not serve on a public company. So in fact, I think what's happened is by trying to codify all these things under the law, what we've ended up with is over time a worse situation. So I tend to agree long term. I think your notion of just making it part of our, and that's why I went to the idea of society's norms, what our culture approves of. If we laugh at some of these things that go on in our society and don't take them seriously, we're going to see that reflected by businesses. Businesses will just be reflective of that. So I think a whole lot of what we have to think about is what are the values in society. I don't know that we could devise a business oath that would be any more effective. I think what we really learn about ethics, we learn at our mother's knees. And I think it's very tough. So while I applaud what Harvard, all these schools are doing, I think they are either reinforcing what somebody's already learned, or they're just introducing people to something that they're unlikely to adopt in their own lives. Yeah.
Just as a clarification, when you talk about bright lines, is that more of self-incorporated guidelines, or are we talking more red flags, or
Yeah, I mean, to me, the bright line is always around this notion of respecting other people's interests, and helping other people achieve their dreams. And if you really think about, what is in another party's best interest, and you say, I will never violate that, I will never take advantage of another party, then that is a bright line, and it's a pretty severe bright line. If you operate within that one, then you pretty much know you're going to be operating ethically. Now, a lot of people that I consider very ethical bump up against those bright lines, but they don't cross them. And I think it is somewhat personal, but I think there's really almost no better definition than what you find in the Golden Rule about, doing unto others. Yeah, Don?
The story where you were presented with the problem, the third thing you have. Curious how the whole whistleblower ethical there's significant pressure in the country to not protect whistleblowers. And there's also this interesting thing, if you know all of the employees by name and know their families and their situations, there's always a possibility of increased desire to protect them, because these are your friends, these are the people that you're working together with to try to get something done. And that may do something that isn't ethical to the rest of to the customers, to the environment, and other things. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things Don's pointing out is that you have competing constituencies. You really have to look out for employees, you have to look out for society at large, for the environment, for your shareholders. So how do you define those? I actually think that you look long-term at building long-term value in a business. So to me, that would be kind of the guiding light, is to build long-term value. Do you build long-term value by taking advantage of people, by making short-term profits? I don't think so. I think by doing the right thing over and over. So that may mean firing an employee that you're very fond of. And there are right ways to do that. There are ethical ways to do that. But you have to do that if you're saying, I am about building long-term value by respecting it. But you're right, there is this competing constituencies that you're having to juggle and make judgments about. I actually think that there is quite a good protection for whistleblowers now. You said there's not protection for whistleblowers, but under the law there's a lot. In fact, if any of you wants to never be fired in an organization, just whistleblow. They can't fire you. So you just say, I think something suspicious is going on with Elaine. She can't fire you once that happens, if you're a public company. So there's a lot of protection. In a way, we've gone overboard on that. So again, to me, it comes back to this idea of you know, having people trained in these ideas of what is a virtuous life, what is a life well lived, what are the true values that are enduring, that build value, that respect other people. If you can get that built into the culture of a company, then you make these judgments between which constituencies do we put first with a lot more ease. Yeah.
What are the prospects for our global consensus on that?
Zero. There are such cultural differences. What are the prospects for a global consensus on ethics in business? And I deal with businesses all over, and I have students from all over the world. And we talk about some of these issues in cases that we have. And I'll have students, and I won't mention the countries, where they'll just say, that would never in a million years work in our country because of the way you have to get regulations passed, or the way you have to bribe officials, or the way you have to... So, and again, they're working with, and these are thorny issues. It's either go out of business or figure out a way to bribe officials.
So what's the message for global companies that want to succeed? What do they have to do?
Well, fortunately, I think that's where the law does help us a little bit, where it's against the law to participate in certain of these things. And I think by that we are kind of the more global commerce becomes, the more likely what you just described is.
One last question from the president.
Okay.
We can't let you off the stage without a comment about JetBlue's recent travails on the 9 hours out on the runway and the loss of financial commitments on their guarantees and stuff like that.
So thank you all very much for coming. So for any of you who don't know, JetBlue just stranded a bunch of passengers on the tarmac for 9 and 10 hours. And let me give you a little bit of background. That was as a result of an internal policy that said, we believe customers would rather complete their flights than be on time. So we're not going to cancel flights. And we were getting pats on the back from our customers all the time about, you know, you're the one airline that just at least doesn't cancel flights. So all of a sudden, this backed up to the de-icing machines weren't getting the wings taken care of fast enough. The tower stopped answering. The pilots were stranded in Boston. We ran up against federal aviation requirements of not flying more than a certain number of hours until the whole system melted down. And we couldn't let people out on the tarmac. That's against the regulations. So you have people trapped for hours on the plane. Well, the dilemma is, do you go on the air, do you respond to the press, to all your constituents and say, look, it was these other guys, look what happened. It was an act of God. It was the FAA regulations. It was this, that, or the other. Or do you do what our chairman and CEO did, which was say, mea culpa, we're embarrassed, we're sorry about this, we'll make sure it never happens again, we'll create our own passenger bill of rights and publish it. We lost $33 million in that storm, one storm. And I lost a lot of hours on the phone with lawyers and board members and working through that. But in the end, I think we did the highly ethical thing, and I've made the case to others that I actually think it will improve our brand. So I think the ethical thing is what we did, and I think in the long run, it will improve the value of the stock and our relationship with our customers. So I think business ethics is not an oxymoron, but it pays off in the long run. And that's a good case of it. Thank you. Do you want the mic one?
Thanks, Joel. If I could have Becky Hunter stand up, and she's got parking validation for any of you who need that. And once again, thanks so much to Joel. Thanks to Becky, Don Levange, for helping out with the Ethics Center. I think I didn't mention Lori Palmer here, Associate Vice President, and I hope I mentioned the